This is Let Your Voice Be Heard, right here on WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem.
And we are back on Shut Your Mouth, Jackie. No one asked you to sing anything, okay?
Oh my God,
that's right.
Nice to me.
The only one who's not allowed to sing is you.
I have a wonderful voice. But we are back on Let Your Voice Be Heard on 90.3 FM, WHCR, the voice of Harlem. If you just tuned in, we were talking about vaccinations and whether you should be forced to vaccinate your children unless it's some sort of real legitimate health issue and not your child has a chest cold, but like cancer or something. And now we are on to the News Roundup, where we talk about our favorite news stories throughout the week. Things that made us laugh, cry, scratch our heads, curse, go to the bathroom for a really long time, or binge drink. That happens to people.
You're like an old man.
Not to me, like a friend of mine though.
You like reading the paper and you don't realize you're there for a while?
You know what?
Are you friends with a lot of grandpas?
I'm not going to deny that comment, Alyssa. Jackie, roses are red, violets are blue. Shut up. All right, Alyssa, you first.
I have a story, and it's about like your two favorite things, Stanley. It's about guns and gays.
Oh my God! Yes.
We get both of them in the same story.
Gays cause climate change.
Yeah. So Nebraska, which is a state that still bans same-sex marriage, they actually have a case pending about their same-sex marriage ban. And as we already know, the Supreme Court is going to hear the big case about whether these same-sex marriage bans violate the Constitution in April and probably decide on it at the end of June. But in the meantime, Nebraska still does not recognize same-sex marriage.
Rightfully so.
However, this week, Nebraska wanted to pass a gun law in which they wanted to make it easier for the spouse of a military member to be able to get a concealed carry permit. So to give you some background, right now, if you move to Nebraska and you want to get a concealed carry permit for your weapon, you have to wait 180 days to become a resident. Mm-hmm. But what they're finding is a lot of military spouses move to Nebraska for whatever reason, and these spouses, they want basically to waive this 180-day waiting period. So then one of the lawmakers who's in favor of same-sex marriage, and he's against the ban, he said, well, under the federal government, which these are federal government employees because they're military members, the federal government defines spouse as being, a same-sex spouse or an opposite-sex spouse because of the repeal of the Defense of Marriage Act after the Supreme Court ruled on it. So he said, well, if we're talking about federal employees, then we have to use the federal definition of marriage to determine who's married for the purposes of our gun law. And so then they passed this bill, they passed this amendment, and they defined a spouse as under using the federal definition of spouse.
Nice.
And then one of the conservative lawmakers was like, guys, I think we just recognize gay marriage.
That's awesome.
So, obviously this is interesting because you're talking about two things, and somebody wrote, we shall see which is stronger, bigotry against gay people or gun rights. And I wrote back saying, no, I actually think they care more about gun rights, because if they cared more about bigotry, then they would not have passed this amendment to this law using the federal definition of spouse.
I think that their perception is the gays can marry as long as I can shoot black people who scare me. I think that's the thing.
And speaking about shooting people that scare you.
You like that transition, right, Jackie?
Great. Oh, I'm nauseous.
Yes, guys. So this is Let Your Voice Be Heard, by the way. And if you want to call in with a news story, the number is 212-650-6903, or you can tweet us at BeHeard_radio.
Do it.
And I want to share a very funny story that I shared with Jackie earlier this week.
It's really hilarious. Yeah,
I laughed.
It's
and she
so
didn't,
funny
because she has a horrible sense of humor.
I did not laugh.
But
thought it was very sad.
Late last weekend, a man was going home with his girlfriend, and she was shot. She was stabbed. That man called the cops.
Stanley, really.
That man called the cops. When the cops arrived on the scene, they shot him and his three-legged dog.
Ugh.
Why am I not surprised?
That's not funny at all. That's horrible.
So
was there a reason
Stanley
why
thought
they
it was
shot
funny
him?
that they
He
shot
was
the
black.
dog.
Because, they shot him. He's black. Okay, that makes sense, because cops shoot black people whether they're guilty or not. That makes sense. But the dog had 3 legs.
Why they shoot the dog?
Exactly. You see how you're not even questioning the fact they shot the black guy, because we know the cops just... Black
That's
guy,
just what they do.
Sprinkle some crack on his nose. Let's keep it
Well,
moving.
there's an article that came out last week about how NYPD officers, black NYPD officers, feel very, very nervous when they get off duty and they're going home. They feel like they're going to get caught up in this whole mess of a thing also. And actually, there's been several NYPD officers who have been... in situations with police officers where they literally
were off duty.
They were off duty and they were like holding up their badge like, I am a cop, do not shoot me.
Right. Which is crazy, yeah, because they themselves are police officers. They're just not in uniforms. That's really...
Yeah, it is pretty
the
crazy.
State of the Union. Great.
So I have another story. This is good. It's coming out of the UK. And essentially, it's somebody wrote that it's interesting that the UK actually has the Church of England, whereas we don't have like an established church in America.
Well,
considering
that was the point, right?
England. But England is actually more of a secular country than we are. I actually lived in England for a little while. I found it to be much more secular. And most European countries seem to be much more secular than, America really is, despite the fact that our government is not and should never be based on religion and separation of church and state, we have a high number of people in this country that are religious. Anyways, so in the UK, basically a whole bunch of scientists, they got really mad because they feel that every time there's a scientific issue that arises, the Church of England tries to interfere. Right now, this is with respect to using the DNA from a third person in very specific medical situations, in vitro fertilization.
Right.
I don't know all the science behind that, but essentially there's some kind of certain disorders that the child or the fetus can come down with in vitro, and to prevent that, they can actually use DNA from a healthy egg of a third person in order to fix that. And it's not like playing God, and it's not like doing like genetic alterations or anything funky like that. And essentially the Church of England has tried to interfere in the legalization of this. And so these scientists turn around and they said, you know what? You guys want to interfere with science? We're going to interfere with the church. And then he says, if representatives of the church are allowed to do that, meaning interfere, when logically we as representatives are allowed to do the same, or is that persecution? So that's a good question for you to think about. Is it persecution when scientists want to interfere with the church?
I don't know what persecution means. I'm going to assume that's racist. So, guys, we do have a call on the line right now, and I forgot his name already, so you can tell us again, but I think it's Dave. Dave, let your voice be heard.
Hey, morning. I'm actually David, and I'm out in San Francisco, so greetings from a rainy day out on the West Coast.
How is the rice-a-roni out there?
Well, do you believe it or not, I don't think I've had any since I moved out here.
But love San Francisco.
I got fat pretty fast on burritos, so
nice.
I can certainly recommend those. Hey, I was kind of interested in a couple of the other topics, but it's interesting you were just mentioning that you've got the Ethical Society up there in New York. I was from St. Louis, and they had one back there. And so this whole idea of pitting, various churches have had, their honest people and their dirty dealers who were always looking for the tithe. And so it's interesting that political machination you were just describing, somebody that, an honest religious person that might come up with a recognizable ethical conundrum, political conundrum, and raises that as an issue, some form of justice that gets spoken of finally from the pulpit, and they get shot down in a kind of a war between politics and religion, when in fact it's an ethical argument. So the ethicist gets pushed out of the church gets limited, and the people never get served. So yeah, it's kind of interesting, getting the voice of the honest, usually gets shot down, and then you have the remnants of people who, ride out the tithing because of it. It's kind of sad. Hey, along those lines, in a more detailed version, I've been keeping track of ISIS. I work on energy policy issues out here in San Francisco, and ISIS is not a religious gang. They are basically a pack of thugs who are hired by the oil companies to steal land, drive people off the lands, so the mineral rights can be, transferred, let's say.
Well, that's an interesting point. I've never actually heard anyone say that, but we are going to be talking about ISIS and Jordan in the next segment, so make sure you tune in for that. We're running out of time, so I wanted to make sure we shifted the gears a little bit. But, David, thank you so much for calling in. Next time I go to Rice-A-Roni, I want a burrito. Next time I go to San Francisco, I want a burrito.
You want a burrito with rice?
I had a burrito in San Francisco a few months ago. It was
Jackie?
great.
It was
so good. You're just jealous.
You want to hear
Do
a joke,
not.
Jackie?
No.
Oh,
no.
I was going to say your
no.
shirt is nice.
No.
But whatever. Anyways, guys, I have a funny story that I want to bring up about President Barack Jaquan Obama.
It's funny.
So while he was rapping, right, at a religious meeting, because he wanted to come in and rap and sell his mixtape or whatever, he said about Christianity, people are so quick to judge the religion of Islam as if Christianity didn't have the Crusades, as if people didn't use Christianity to justify slavery and Jim Crow laws. And the white devil prince came and he fought. No, it wasn't just white people this time. It was just Christians got really ticked off that he said that. And they were like,
he spoke the truth.
They said that it is wrong, it is incorrect, that Christianity has never perpetuated violence. I want to get you guys' opinions, Jaco.
I mean, yeah, it has, right? Like, if that's just not...
Was that all you have for
true.
us? Like, yeah.
It has, historically, yes, it has. I mean, that's the problem that a lot of Muslims are facing now, is that they practice their religion. They don't condone violence. They don't identify with that. We're talking about extremist groups, right?
Yeah.
I think that's what
and
our
there's
comments are
plenty
saying.
of the Westboro Baptist Church, although they don't, necessarily, they sue people who pursue violent acts against them. They are like a very hurtful organization, but they align themselves. They're an extremist group. No Christians, everybody hates them. No Christians, identify with the Westboro Baptist Church. There's these extremist sects that pop up for whatever reason, and that they don't speak for the entire religion, right? So, I mean, it's just wrong to say that Christianity hasn't, had its history in violence.
The Selma witch burnings, where they would tie a
Yeah.
cinder block to a woman's legs and throw it in the water.
Exactly.
And if she floated, she was a witch.
Incredibly violent, but it's violence towards women, so
Well,
we don't
and
really
the
pay
other-
attention to that part of history.
A lot of people were saying that the president's comments were like, they were too far removed, essentially, right? That like the Crusades happened such a long time ago, and that, essentially the Christian religion has come far and the Muslim religion hasn't gotten there. And so that's why they were kind of like drawing a distinction. But you know what? I want to point out, maybe the president could have used a better example, and I'll give you some that I think maybe he could have used in place of them that are more modern to
Like
draw
Jim Crow?
to like Jim Crow, and I'll give you another two in a second. But I still think his point, whether he used the Crusades as an example or one of the more modern examples that I'm going to give you, is his point was that religions are violent, that it's not just one religion that is violent, that like at some point in history, every single religion has had violent nature or has had a small group of extremist people within them that have perpetuated violence, and that group of people within the larger group don't represent the larger group. But I'll just give you some more recent examples that could have been used. Between 1992 and 1995, over 200,000 ethnic Muslims were massacred by Serbian Christians in a massive ethnic cleansing program. The KKK, which calls itself a Christian organization, as you already brought up, burned people alive as recently as the 1960s. Christian violence isn't a phenomenon that's only occurred in the distant past. It's why it's hypocritical for Christians to whine about how evil and violent Islam is, because Christianity has had a long history of the same types of violence. And like I said, you can say it was a small group of people, but then you have to be able to say that it's the same kind of small group of people, I think, as our caller pointed out.
It was an entire country. They justified raping black women because, according to the Bible, black women were naturally lusty because of their big behinds. They justified slavery because in the Bible, which I think is a piece of information, I'm not going to say what I was going to say, because of the Bible, it said that a slave should respect their master, even the worst of them. They justified stoning women because the Bible said that if you couldn't prove you were a virgin, that you would be stoned to death as a woman. This Christianity is just as brutal and vicious as the worst ISIS soldier, so to speak. And the president saying that there's no false pretense to it. It's 100% factual. And a lot of these Christians who claim to be so holier than thou and ready to judge the religion of Islam, let me tell you a little secret. 90% of the Holy Bible is the Quran. Why you got so quiet? Damn it!
I don't know enough about the Quran. I only know about the Old Testament.
I read both of them.
As somebody who's
from
Jewish,
12 years of Hebrew school, I can speak to
as somebody
to
who's
that.
Jewish, I've read the Old Testament, and it's funny because somebody came onto the Politically Preposterous page and made literally a preposterous comment that blew my mind about how nowhere in the Bible whatsoever is there any does it tell people to do violence. And like I could literally find so many quotes that I could lift from both the Old Testament and the New Testament where essentially it says to do violence
You can
against
slaughter the
people.
men, then rape their wives.
But, there's another thing that needs to be said is that, just because we point out this doesn't mean we're attacking or persecuting Christians that are, good people that, are good church-going people that want to help out. I mean, we have plenty of Christians in this country that donate their time and their money to a food pantry and help poor people and,
Alyssa,
do
I'm
great
sorry.
things.
I need every Christian to tell me they don't agree with the Crusades and that they don't agree with slavery and they don't agree with Jim Crow before I believe that Christians are are not violent.
Well, I mean, I think the point that we're trying to make is that it's as ludicrous to say that, Islam as in its entirety is more inherently violent than any other religion, right? There's always going to be religions that come out. I mean, it's ideology, it's things that we believe, it's the spiritualness that we connect with, and there's always going to be people that misinterpret and that turn it into this violence where, they're seeing other people that don't believe or have differing opinions and want to act out in a violent way, and they sort of twist and manipulate the meaning of the religion. So I don't think it's inherently, I mean, just because, like I said, we have a short-term memory, right? I said that earlier, and I think it's true that we have to look at history, and I don't think it was out of place for Obama to make that point about the Crusades, because we need to look at human history in its entirety.
Agree, and I think that is the point. The point is, the bigger point that needs to be made and should be made continuously is it doesn't matter which religion we're talking about. There are good people within the religion and there are bad people within the religion, and we shouldn't judge an entire religion based on the actions of a small group of people or a moderate-sized group of people that engage in bad actions.
You are absolutely right, guys, because no matter what religion you believe in, the power of stupid can be overwhelming.
Agree.
We got to go on a quick break, guys. When we come back, we'll be talking about Jordan versus ISIS. That's right, Michael Jordan. This is Let Your Voice Be Heard.
This place about to blow.